Whether you're listening at home, at work, or anywhere, thanks for making Para X part of your day. Your source for everything paranormal, Para X.
And welcome back to the Paranormal View right here on the Para X Radio Network. I want to thank everybody for listening tonight, those in the chat room and those listening from around the world. Hope everybody has stayed with us, even though we did have a small problem. Got back on the air and as quickly as we could. And we kept right on going. So I want to welcome back Jeffrey.
Hello, hello, hello.
And Barbara Duncan.
Hello, folks.
And our great guest, Keven McQueen.
Hello, hello. Hi, everybody.
All right. Barbara, speaking of people from around the world, who we got listeners at tonight?
Tonight they're coming in from the United States, United Kingdom, Canada, and our little friend Unknown.
Oh, up on the moon. The backside. Yeah, okay.
Wow, they're
Waiting for the creepy moon story.
I guess they figured, the wedding's over, might as well listen to the Paranormal View.
Yeah, sure. That's just as important.
Yeah.
Pretty much. Yeah.
So, we're talking about Kevin's book, Creepy California. And, there's a lot of creepy stuff in California, but there's creepy stuff just like what he writes about all over the United States. Kevin, have you ever thought of looking at some of the other countries' weird stories like these?
Well, it's strange you should mention that, but I've actually been collecting items from other nations, hoping that someday I might write a Gothic world type book.
All right. That'd be interesting. Some of them countries over there is a lot older than us, so they got to have some good stories.
Well, I've got some pretty good ones.
One of my favorites, we got to talk about this, which is you titled it Bill Doesn't Know His Own Strength.
Oh, right.
Do you want to tell that little story?
Well, it's a story about a man named, I don't even know his last name. It's in my original notes. His name was Bill, and he died in the early 1930s. And he was very, very proud of his physical strength. And early one April morning in 1906, he went into a San Francisco bar and demanded a drink on credit, and the bartender wouldn't let him have one. And Bill threatened to shake the whole bar down if he didn't let him have a drink. The bartender sneered at him. Bill got hold of some pipes and started shaking, and right at that moment, the San Francisco earthquake happened.
Oh,
and Bill spent the rest of his life convinced that he caused it.
Oh, nice.
Yeah.
How's that for comic timing?
It was like great timing.
I would have almost expected maybe he had a precognition it was going to happen and used it to his advantage, like some of those old movie serials where they were being, about to be sacrificed and the eclipse always happens, and they're like, oh, we're gods.
Wow.
I wonder if he ever got the drink.
Yeah.
I wonder. I would say there was nothing left of the bar afterwards, but you never know. He might have gotten free drinks the rest of his life after that.
There goes the top shelf. Yep.
When we got the reputation of being an earthquake starter,
Yeah.
everybody was afraid not to serve him.
It's very possible.
Yeah. Well, there is one that I thought was pretty funny, almost, it's sad, but it was funny. There was a girl under strange circumstances. Her name was Alta F, and she was age 20, and she thought she was a natural-born killer. And she kept having thoughts of killing her sister and killing this person and that person. And I guess she was afraid that was going to happen. So in September 6th, 1930, she kept feeling that all this energy was coming in through her arm that was making her want to kill. And she went to a railroad track and laid her arm up there and let the train cut it off.
Well, that would be fast and rather quick.
Well, she survived.
And
Well,
she
she had
never
a turn.
killed anybody.
She never
Yeah.
killed anybody.
So maybe she was right.
Yeah. Got rid of that old killing arm.
The one-armed man from Twin Peaks.
I actually did a student film where a guy was convinced that his arm had been possessed, and he was begging his friend to cut it off because otherwise he was going to kill people. And I play like the shop teacher or something, and I come in and they end up killing me, and then he gets himself, his arm cut off anyway or something. It's kind of weird.
I think there's some horror movies too with the plot where someone gets a hand transplant and the hand comes from a murderer and they end up getting murderous impulses.
Yeah.
So.
Michael Caine did that. It was one of those The Hand movies.
I think Alan Alda did too.
Alan Alda?
Back in the late 60s.
Okay.
It's called the Mephisto Waltz, I think, if I remember correctly.
Oh, I remember
yeah.
just a waltz. I actually never saw the film, but I didn't know that was a Hand movie.
I think so. I might be wrong about that. But I wonder if some scriptwriter didn't get the idea from that news article.
I thought Mephisto Waltz was more about almost like a Rosemary's Baby kind of culty thing. That's what my brain is saying. Now I have to look it up.
I should look it up too. I think there was a movie called The Hands of Orlok.
Oh, yeah.
Way back that had
Peter
that
Lorre.
same plot. Yeah, Peter Lorre.
Okay, Mephisto.
Ow. That's not good.
Okay, nothing.
Oh, well.
Nothing specifically about a hand. It says Mephisto Waltz, a frustrated pianist himself, music journalist Miles Clarkson, Alan Alda, is thrilled to interview virtuoso Duncan Eli. Kurt Durkins. Duncan, however, is terminally ill, not much interested in Miles until noticing that Miles' hands are ideally suited for piano. Suddenly, he can't get enough of his new friend, and Miles' wife, Paula, Jacqueline Bissett, becomes suspicious of Duncan's intention. His suspicion grows when Duncan dies, and Miles mysteriously becomes a virtuoso overnight. So he may have had possessed hands.
Ah, there you go. But not necessarily murderous hands.
Yeah, that's as much as the synopsis gives.
Still creepy.
Yeah.
If we talk a little bit about the part you wrote on Leland Stanford.
Isn't that weird?
And yeah, the stash of items of spiritualism.
Oh,
Well,
yeah.
evidently he had a brother, T.W. Stanford, who was very interested in the occult. And he lived in Australia. And when he died, he promised a gift to Stanford, but instead of money, it was just a lot of old fetishes and dried up seaweed and ceremonial daggers and things like that from other countries, especially Australia. So the story goes that at Stanford, they didn't want to turn down a gift given by the founder's brother. On the other hand, they didn't want to put this stuff on display, so they hid it away. And everyone forgot about it. But the story goes, I wonder if it's really, really true or just a legend, but the story goes that there is somewhere in Stanford a room full of all these old occult things from the 19th century that were presented as a gift.
It's like it would be a treasure hunt to go back to Stanford and see if they're there.
If anyone ever
The occult
finds
room?
it, please tell me.
Isn't Stanford in San Francisco?
Stanford is in the South Bay.
Okay, but it's in the area.
Yeah.
Have you ever been over to that school?
No.
Oh, they said in the story that there was two people that went.
Yeah, apparently the novelist Idwal Jones and a professor named Coover actually did see it.
Right. And
They found the room, and now apparently the room itself is lost, or at least that's how the story goes.
you think it was lost or they moved everything and hid it because they didn't. I guess they didn't really want to put out stuff like the spiritual type stuff.
No, which is odd because that's where the Stanford Psychical Research Center is.
Ironically enough, those things, if they actually are there, are probably worth a fortune.
Oh, most definitely. But then there was also the practice of simply just sheetrocking over doors, etc. So it's possible that it's there, but you will never find a doorway.
No, not now. They wanted it hid. So, yeah. Pretty interesting.
Oh, yeah.
You got one that I thought was interesting, and Barbara, she'll probably like this one. She'll probably go out looking. I guess it was called Far-Fetched Frisco Phantoms, and there was a house that was in 1884. This house was reported haunted in San Francisco, and it was at the corner of Larkin Street and Willow Avenue. The guy couldn't get anybody to rent the house because it was so haunted, I reckon. So he ended up having the house moved to, 27th and Castro Streets, and still couldn't get the place rented. Nobody wanted to rent it. I guess it was just really, really scary. Anyway, there was some kids, or older kids, I guess, decided they was going to go there and just see exactly what it was. And do you remember that story?
Well, I remember they heard all of these terrifying noises and lights, and even saw apparently ghosts outside the house. It's one of those stories where they report about it in the newspapers, and then there aren't any follow-up stories. So you're just left to wonder what happened next. And it's aggravating because you realize you never will know what happened next.
Right.
They still made a good story.
I guess if everybody got killed horribly, it's like, oh well.
I guess.
Well, I don't think any of the people, them boys, I don't think none of them got killed, but there was three, and one of them got so scared he wouldn't go back again. But the other two did go back again, and they even seen more stuff. So I think Barbara should check and see if that house is still standing or what happened to it.
I'm not even sure that there's houses there anymore. It's mostly businesses.
Oh, is it really?
Yeah.
I'd be really surprised if it still existed.
Well, if you could find out
Never know.
what house it stood at on either one of those two addresses, and maybe the business might have something going on in it.
Well, I mean, this brings up a point of what's haunted. Is it the land it sits on or the house itself?
True. Depends on what was causing the problem to start with. I mean, if it was at one place haunted and then they moved it and that place was haunted, then that leads you to believe that there was something in the house, and that's only if it was really haunted to start with. So it could have just been a lot of people making stories, you know. So that you just don't know. So did you guys, while we was off the air, talk about this one? And this one was, I think, the longest story in the book, called Gordon's Murder Farm.
No, we didn't bring that one out.
I thought we were talking about that with the Changeling, or is that a different murder farm?
No, that's a different story.
Oh, okay.
Oh, no, it is the same story.
It's the same story, but we didn't talk about it on the air.
Not on the air. No, we was talking about it before we even got on.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
It's about Gordon Northcott, a serial killer who lived at Wineville, California. He was a chicken rancher, and he kidnapped and murdered a series of young boys. And the Clint Eastwood movie, The Changeling, is somewhat based on this true story, because one of the boys who disappeared and was later pretty well proved to have been murdered by Northcott, police found a boy in another state, and they brought him back to California claiming it was a certain woman's son, and she kept saying, no, it's not really my son. Don't you think I know my own son? And the police just called her crazy. And if you see the movie, it's really quite a good retelling of the story. It focuses on her, but there's definitely Gordon Northcott in the movie. And they even depict his execution at the end of the film, and they followed true life quite well.
I like how in the movie Donald Moffat pretty much playing the police captain all but coerced her into, at first, pretending that it was her son for the press. And then as time went on, she's like, no, this really isn't, no. And of course, that came back to bite her when she really started to protest, because they're like, well, you said it was, even though that they had forced her to do so.
They even put her in a mental institution for a while.
Well, they used to do that for women on the slightest things back then, yeah. That's why we have so many horror movies.
Yeah, and the guy ended up, well, I guess it was, they'd lived in Canada and they come down from Canada, didn't they?
Yeah, originally they were from Canada.
And they moved to, I forget what city it was. Anyway, they wanted to get away from the city, and they moved out to this farm and raised chickens, or was a chicken farm, something like that. Anyway, it was him, his mom, and his dad. His dad didn't like what was going on, so he left him and went back to the town to live. He ended up kidnapping one of his younger cousins and made him help him do a lot of stuff.
Yeah, that's true.
I mean, it's a long story, but I mean, it's really good the way way you have it written in the book. And he ended up firing his lawyer and tried to
defend himself.
Defend himself. Yeah, he was
a terrible job.
Yeah, he did.
Comically a terrible job.
Yeah. So, but he knew where the bodies, where he had killed. There was one woman and guy, man and wife, had two sons, and he had killed them. They were Boy Scouts, and all they wanted him to do was tell them where their bodies were buried, and he would never do that. He'd give them the runaround. And then there was the other woman whose son, I guess he was one of the first ones that was killed. Wasn't he like 12 years old, 13 years old, something like that?
Yeah.
And it was a young kid. And that's all she wanted, was for him to just tell her where the body was buried. And he wouldn't tell none of them. He kept giving them all the runaround. Even up to the time for him to be executed, he just wouldn't tell them. So.
Yeah, they found some human remains on his farm, but they think he probably, once he realized he was about to get in some trouble with the law, they think he probably exhumed some bodies and hid them in the mountain range nearby. And some of them have probably never been found and never will be found. So no one really knows to this day exactly how many children he killed.
Yeah, they thought maybe around between 10 and 15. And then the one guy, which was one of his younger relatives, that he was making him help, he said he thought that they might be as many as 50.
It's a really nightmarish story.
Yeah.
Excellent. Even the town doesn't really exist anymore. It was Wineville, and because of the notoriety that Gordon Northcott caused them, they changed their name to Miraloma.
Wow.
So Wineville's not on the map anymore because of this guy.
Really?
Really, yeah.
And they didn't want anybody to go out looking and make a public thing about. Wow.
Yeah, and one of the most tragic stories in your book, and I loved it, was their song was Claire de Lune.
Oh yeah, that's a good one too.
That's a really sad one. They should make a movie out of that.
Yeah.
I think so.
Tell us about that one.
It's really hard not to feel sorry for the guy. His name was Leslie Jareth, and he was married, not happily. He was quite wealthy. He owned a couple of jewelry stores and fell in love with a much younger woman, I think about half his age. And this would have been in the early 1940s. And eventually, he killed her in a tourist cabin. Very strange story. He had a classical music fixation. He was playing Clair de Lune on a phonograph. Eventually, he went to the gas chamber, I think in 1942. He would never explain the circumstances. He was highly sympathetic. A lot of people thought that if he had defended himself better, he actually could have gotten off with a life sentence, but he refused to and said he really preferred to die.
I guess one of the reasons it'd be tough to make a movie is if you don't know the motivations or what took place.
Yeah, that's true. There were a lot of theories, but nobody really knows for sure because he simply wouldn't talk about it.
Well, go ahead, Barbara.
Oh, I was going to say, and the most beautiful line in the whole thing was as he was going to his death, I have an appointment and I'll keep it.
Even the warden felt terrible for him.
Yeah. Well, he come from another country.
I think he was from Hungary.
Yeah, that's what I thought it was.
If I remember correctly.
Mm-hmm. And he started working at this, I guess it was working at a jewelry store. And the owner had a daughter, and he fell in love with her and married her probably about 2 or 3 years after he started working with the guy. And they were really in love. They had, 1, 2 kids, something like that?
2 sons, yeah.
Sons. And I guess then they started having problems because I guess people wasn't really sure because he wouldn't talk about it too much. But I think in your book you were saying that he said that she would be drinking all the time, and I guess all kinds of things, wouldn't cook him meals, give him bad food, or just doing all kinds of stuff like that. And then she tried to turn around and say that he was going out with other women and doing different things like that. And he wasn't. They ended up having, he got 2 jewelry stores of his own, and he had this other young girl started working for him, and he ended up falling in love with her, and that's how the whole thing.
Yeah, that's how he met her.
Yeah, and but it's real sad because he loved his wife and sons, and he didn't want anything to happen with that. So he was caught in a dilemma. And then in the book, you were saying that they thought that she had other boyfriends too. So she was seeing other guys, even though these 2 were actually going out and dating and stuff. So it was a big triangle mess.
It really was.
And the night before his execution, he was sitting in a cell listening to Clair de Lune.
Yep.
And eating hamburgers. He said the 2 of them always had a hamburger and a Coke on their dates. So the night before he was executed, his final meal was 2 hamburgers, 2 Cokes.
Wow. You know.
And went to his death with Ave Maria?
Yes.
Yes.
Yep.
That's what they played. Wow. You know, they said he took 4 deep breaths when the cyanide tablets hit, and he was gone.
It's a very sad story.
I can't see doing something that you're going to be killed for. I mean, it's just simple as that.
Apparently, he really did want to die, though.
Yeah.
He certainly didn't put up any fight for his life.
Didn't. And like you were saying, they thought that if he would have just told them, the circumstances and everything, that he probably could have, well, actually, they wanted him to, plead insanity or something?
Yeah, and he refused to do that.
Yeah, because they felt that they could have got him off with maybe a life sentence or even less. but he didn't.
Wow.
He didn't want the stories out about her, and he didn't want stories out about his wife and stuff. So he took everything on his own.
And even wired the governor asking him not to commute the sentence.
Right.
So yeah, he really did want to.
Yeah.
Wow. It would make a great movie,
Yeah, it would.
I think. Yeah. I mean, there's a lot of these in your books, and not just Creepy California, but your other books as well. Do you ever stop to think that maybe you should be writing screenplays?
That would be kind of neat. I don't know the first thing about it, though.
Well, if you want to
Right.
Yeah, I'm sitting here being the writer that I am, and I can't even say a right word. In fact, Henry wrote a short story years and years ago and had me adapt it as just a 30-page screenplay. But I believe he liked what I provided.
Well, if any Hollywood producers are out there listening to this, please contact us.
Believe me, I've been constantly saying, I'm an actor, and I can do this.
We'll work for reasonable rates.
Yeah. Excellent, excellent. You had another one in your book that I thought was pretty interesting. It was a pre-Halloween costume party, and the headline on it that you had was "Death of the Party." So,
That's a great pun, isn't it?
yeah. So you want
I'm sure nobody else ever would have thought of that. That's a story I almost didn't put in. I try not to put in anything that's really recent. And that happened in 1967, which I thought was just recent enough.
Not so much, really.
Maybe I shouldn't. And then I thought, well, it's a pretty good story. It's a real Agatha Christie in real life kind of story where a man shot another man at a Halloween party. And of course, everybody around thought it was just a joke. So people were dancing around this dying man.
Oh, no.
And then they realized suddenly that it was all real. So again, that almost sounds like a movie come to life there.
It's almost like the stories of people who commit suicide by hanging themselves during the Halloween sequence and season, and people think it's just Halloween decor.
Yeah, I have a book coming out in September with a story exactly like that.
Man.
Oh yeah, in September. That'll be another book.
Oh, yep.
We've only had you on twice, so this is only the second book we've talked about, and you've got another 4, 5, 6 books out?
Well, actually, the one coming out in September will be my 17th book.
Really?
Wow.
So I've done a lot. Lately, with Indiana University Press, I've been trying to do a series covering regions. So there's the California book. Last year that came out. Also a book about the Midwest called Horror in the Heartland. And in September comes the New England book called New England Nightmares, about New England and the northern states. And currently I'm working on the one about the other western states other than California. I had one about the South that came out from Pelican Publishing about 3 years ago.
When we had you on the last time, Horror in the Heartland is one we talked about.
Yeah, that was it.
Yeah.
Yeah. So what are your other books about?
Well, a lot of them are just 3 or 4 are simply Kentucky-based, 3 or 4 are Indiana-based. And then I started branching out and doing entire regions. One is about the Louisville Tornado of 1890. And some are just biographies. I wrote a biography of Cassius Clay, the Kentucky emancipationist.
Oh, okay.
And I have a couple of books that are about just Kentucky eccentrics.
So that's not confused with Muhammad Ali, Cassius Clay.
Right.
Yeah, it turns out that Muhammad Ali was actually named after the Kentucky Cassius Clay.
Oh, okay.
I'm curious, the Louisville tornado?
Yeah, Louisville was hit by a massive tornado in 1890. It's really a strange story because it was an immense disaster. I think if you look in the record books, I'm trying to remember what the official death toll, it was like 70 people, I think, but through my research, I discovered it was more like 120, which makes it one of the worst tornadoes in American history, and yet everyone's totally forgotten about it. Even in Louisville, most people have never heard of it.
This is the first I'm hearing it.
Yeah, it's not a famous disaster, but it really should be.
What?
I mean, there's a lot of tornadic activity back there, but yeah, I wasn't aware of this one.
Now, have you thought of doing one? There was a flood that come down through Ohio in 1913, I believe it was. And there was a lot of people killed. Dayton, Middletown, Hamilton, a lot of stuff ruined, destroyed. So there's probably a lot of good stories from the 1913 flood.
Well, I'm sure there are. Yeah, there was a really, really bad world-class flood also in 1937 in the same region.
Right.
And that was Ohio, Kentucky, the entire Midwest. It was just an incredible flood. I'd say someone's probably already done a book about that one.
That probably has, but not in the way that you do them.
Well, you go through the old newspapers and you find all these stories and details that you don't find in other books. So even if it's a subject someone's already done, you can usually find some new things to say about it.
Oh, yeah, yeah. And have you thought about some of there's got to be some stories like that you do about like maybe in Texas at the Alamo or North Dakota, Little Bighorn, different places like that, Gettysburg even. There's got to be some good stories of things that took place like that.
Oh, I'm sure there are. Yeah.
Civil War.
There you go.
Yeah.
There.
So, is there a region, do you think, that just has the most information or the most bizarre stories?
Very hard to say. Very hard to say. I can't really think of one that I think would really top all the others.
I mean, I realize that, California has some really strange stuff, death by clown.
It's all
for
weird
example.
stuff, but it's almost like different varieties of weirdness, different kinds of weirdness.
Yeah, I assume that each region would have, various, its own little eccentricities. Especially New England, I would think, would have, that was probably the most, like, Great Gatsby era clientele or citizens.
Yeah, there are quite a few stories in there from around that era, the 1920s. Of course, the New York chapter is the biggest chapter.
Oh, of course, yeah. Well, I mean, we're talking New York City or upper state New York.
Oh, New York City. But there's a lot of upper state New York stories, too.
And you cover the Long Island, Hampton area? Is that a separate?
I think there is a Long Island story in there. It's one of my longest books. I really have trouble remembering the details in that one.
We'll have to look
I have a story about a suicide club on Long Island in there.
Really?
I think
Wow.
so.
I know how you I guess leave it, but it's not exactly something I think you'd want to join.
Oh, it's really surprising how popular these things were back then. I found all these cases of suicide clubs in New England and in the rest of America, too.
You're kidding, really?
Yeah, people would join, and basically the only rule was one person a year would have to kill themselves.
Really?
So naturally, I managed to mine a lot of really dark humor out of it. That's what I do.
Did they draw straws to see who was going to go?
I'm not sure how they chose somebody. One story in particularly was sort of darkly amusing because as the number of people in the club kept dwindling, they started having more fights about who was going to go next. I always thought, well, why don't you just quit the club then?
Well, I was saying that's how
That
you
is
quit
just-
the club.
yeah,
Apparently.
morbid.
I guess so.
Yeah, I mean, if my name come up, I'd be thinking, do I really want to do this? And then what happens if you decided you didn't want to?
Well, the member of one club actually said after he wounded himself fatally that if he hadn't done it, someone else in the club would have killed him. So apparently you either killed yourself or someone else in the club did it for you.
I think I'd have dropped out of that club or not even joined it to start with.
I don't know if
Yeah.
any exist anymore, but at one time it was kind of all the rage.
And this was in the 1930s?
This would have been in the late 1800s, all the way up to about the 1920s or so.
Wow.
Yeah, once the book comes out, you'll definitely have to read about that. It's just completely beyond bizarre.
To see another late night reading this book.
That's the new one coming out in November.
September 1st, I think, is the official release date.
Oh, all
And
right.
It's coming from Indiana University Press.
Well, we'll have to get that one too.
Can you estimate just exactly how many stories you have looked through?
Oh, I would have to say hundreds and maybe thousands. I know my book about the South, called Gothic and Strange Truths, Tales of the South, has got at least 120-something stories just in one chapter.
Wow. We might have to get that book too.
I'm really proud of that one. I actually personally think it's one of my best ones. It's the one that got the whole thing started, where I was going to do all these regions and call them the American Gothic series.
So you'd have more of a
out of-
pitchfork instead of a pitch meeting, you'd have a pitchfork meeting. It was.
I was thinking, you're a teacher, correct?
Yes.
Yeah. Do you have a course in this on your books?
No, that's a kind of a neat idea. They might consider it a conflict of interest. I would like
No.
to teach a class on creative nonfiction, though.
Oh yeah.
I don't think I could teach a fiction writing class. I have no imagination whatsoever, but I could do one on creative nonfiction, where you don't really come up with anything original. You simply tell a story that's actually happened in a strange, perhaps creative way.
But with your own personal slant to it.
But you don't have to invent anything.
Yeah, I don't know how anybody could invent some of these stories. I mean, it's sheer.
Well, as I like to say, real life is a lot stranger than fiction. If you're going to write fiction, it has to sound reasonable, and it has to sound like something that could actually happen, unless it's something like science fiction. So a lot of these incidents are things you really couldn't put in a novel because they'd just be too strange to be believable.
Well, oddly enough, years ago, there was a Q&A with John Cleese from Monty Python discussing their film Meaning of Life, and he pointed out that a lot of stuff you can't use because it's too unbelievable. If you use true stuff, if you use really surreal stuff, it has to be really surreal because that makes sense. Whereas real life is like, what?
Oh, he's right. Definitely right. Fiction has to follow rules, and real life doesn't.
Yeah.
A phrase that I like to use when describing my books, I call them real life surrealism, because they're surreal stories, but they actually did happen.
Yeah.
Wow.
I mean, you have to kind of shake your head at some of these and go, were they making them up? But you realize it's a newspaper story.
Right.
They're just reporting it in their own fashion, but still, somebody had to have done it for them to report it.
Yeah, you have to wonder what's going through these people's minds.
There's very few things you can think of that are so strange that no one's ever done it.
And probably, yeah, they get to write their own books.
Uh,
And it amazes me that there are also reporters out there who are writing these stories up, not realizing that someday that they're going to be looked upon as the historical data, really, for some of this.
Yeah.
So you have, yeah, the reporters from, say, 1920s in these small towns writing like it was for a small town newspaper.
It's like the old saying goes, historians, the first draft of history is written by journalists.
Okay,
Wow.
very logical. It's a wonder, though, that some of them didn't follow up on some of these stories, especially from a small town newspaper.
Oh, I wish they had.
Yeah.
Sometimes you'll find a really weird story in a national newspaper like the New York Times or the Louisville Courier-Journal, and there are no follow-up stories. Well, if you can find the local paper on interlibrary loan, then you can get the rest of the details. I always tell people, get local papers whenever you can because they'll go into the most detail.
Now we have a guy that goes to some of our things at Gettysburg with us from northern Ohio, and his name's Don Allison. He works with a newspaper up there, and he writes articles and stuff for the newspaper. Plus, he has a book out, I think, of his one or two of his own books, and he's trying to branch out into being a publisher. So he might be able to have stories like that he would have from his newspapers.
Oh, I bet he could. I'm sure he could.
I'll get you in contact with him if you'd like, and you can
I'd love to.
Well, our time has just dwindled right on down. I appreciate everybody who has stayed with us and listened to the show tonight, even though we did have a hiccup in between, and I'll have to find out why I no longer had internet. What happened? So anyway, I want to thank Keven for being with us tonight, and what I want you to do is give out where people can get your books at, and where they can follow you and get in contact with you, and all the good stuff about you.
Oh, okay. I have a website, KevenMcQueenStories.com. If you look for it, remember my name is spelled Keven. People sometimes spell it Kevin. And I also have a Facebook page, an author Facebook page, or two pages rather. Keven McQueen is the author page. Kevin D. McQueen is just where I post my own weird comedy.
Actually, I have it down as Kevin.McQueen as your Facebook.
Oh, it might be. Yeah, I think you're right. And also, you can find them online at lots of book retailers like Barnes & Noble. You can get them straight from the publishers, too.
Right. Amazon, all those places has them.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You're not on Twitter, though, right?
No, I don't have Twitter.
Neither do I.
Yeah. I tell you, a lot of authors promote their stuff on Twitter big time, and I promote those authors a lot, just so you know.
Yeah,
in case you ever do, let me know, and I'll,
okay.
Yeah.
Well, again, great reading. Get some of his books. You'll really like them. And we'll be having him back on later on this year sometime, hopefully. So with that, I want you to stay on till we're off. We'll talk with you for a minute or two. And I'm going to let Jeff give out
seconds to go. Facebook, theparanormalview.com is our official website. Facebook.com/theparanormalview, all one word, is our Facebook. You can follow me at Real Badger, both Twitter and Instagram.
All right. Barbara, you got anything?
No, you can follow us all on the Paranormal View website.
Yes.
So go in, check us
Links
out.
and stuff.
That you can get all the information about us, and you can also check out our past shows. So, and if one's not up there, you can follow Jeff's link, because Jeff has all of our shows saved another website. So,
More like 99%, but there you go.
yeah, like that. So anyway, till next week, this is Henry Foister.
Jeffrey Gould.
And Barbara Duncan.
And we will see you next week at the same time. So good night, everybody.
Thank you.
You've been listening to the Paranormal View on the ParaX Radio Network. Join us again next week at the same time for more of the Paranormal View.